Oh, hello there. I'm getting ready for a party. I am so excited. I've got some very, very, very special guests coming. 7 to be exact. I'll give you a clue. Sleepy, grumpy, bashful. Well, I'm sure you know the rest. Oh, that will be them now. Mustache. As you'll know, at the end of the story of Snow White, she and her handsome prince lived happily ever after. And they did too. But that didn't mean that Snow White, now living in a beautiful palace, didn't miss the 7 dwarfs. It was something that had been on her mind for some time, and the prince could tell it was getting her down.
Well, why don't you invite the dwarfs to the palace?
He suggested. Oh, that's a wonderful idea, said Snow White, clasping her hands together. I could throw a party. Oh, it'll be so much fun. She called for a messenger to deliver news of the party to the dwarfs, and was surprised when a young boy ran into the throne room wearing a feather in his cap. Snow White thought he looked far too young to be a messenger, but he certainly seemed keen to help. What's your name? She asked. 'Tis Joggit, said the young boy. Well, Joggit, I need you to find the 7 dwarfs and invite them to a party tomorrow night. Can you do that? Oh, yes, I can, said Joggit, bursting with enthusiasm. And before anyone could say anything more, he had run from the throne room and was on his way. The day of the party arrived, and the palace was festooned with colorful banners and flags, bright tablecloths, and everything was polished and clean so that it sparkled. The tables were laid out with countless kinds of sweet treats. Snow White was dressed in her favorite party dress, and the royal orchestra had begun to play. All that we need now are the 7 dwarfs, said Snow White with glee. But when the trumpets blasted to announce the arrival of the special guests, and the large double doors to the ballroom swung open, everyone gasped with surprise. For there weren't 7 dwarfs stood upon the other side, but one enormous dragon.
Where's the cake, then?
The dragon asked. Excuse me? Asked Snow White with surprise. But what are you doing here? It was the dragon's turn to look surprised.
I was invited,
said the dragon.
A young boy with a feather in his hat said you wanted me to be here.
Oh dear, said Snow White. Well, now that you're here, you'd better stay. I need to have a word with Joggit. One of the palace guards was sent off to find the boy and bring him before Snow White. I asked you to invite the 7 dwarfs, and yet somehow you've managed to invite a dragon, said Snow White to Joggit. Now I have a party without its special guests.
I'm sorry,
said the boy, hanging his head.
By the time I got out into the woods, I couldn't remember who you said to invite.
Fortunately, Snow White was kind and fair, so she didn't get angry. Never mind, she said. We'll just have to have another party tomorrow. Now head off to make sure that the 7 dwarfs are invited. Can you do that? Oh, yes I can, said Joggit, beaming to be given a second chance. Before anyone could say anything more, he had run from the ballroom and was on his way. The next day, the colorful banners and flags were straightened, the bright tablecloths were changed, and everything was polished and cleaned once again so that it sparkled. The tables were filled with yet more countless kinds of sweet treats. Snow White was dressed in her second favorite party dress, and the royal orchestra began to play all over again. Oh, what a lot of work, said Snow White, but it's worth it for the 7 dwarfs. Suddenly, the trumpets blasted to announce the arrival of the special guests, and the large double doors to the ballroom swung open, and everyone gasped with surprise. For there weren't 7 dwarfs stood upon the other side, but 2 hairy trolls. When does the dancing start? Asked one of the trolls. Wait a moment, said Snow White with surprise. But what are you 2 doing here? The trolls looked taken aback. But we were invited, spluttered the second troll. A young boy with a feather in his hat said you wanted us to be here. Oh no, said Snow White. Well, I guess you'd better come in while I have a word with Joggit. A palace guard found the boy and brought him before Snow White. I asked you to invite the 7 dwarfs, and yet somehow you've managed to invite 2 trolls, said Snow White to Joggit. Once again, my party is without its special guests.
Oh, sorry, sniffed the boy. When I arrived in the woods, I couldn't remember who you said to invite.
Luckily for Joggit, Snow White still didn't get angry. Oh, never mind, she said patiently. We'll just have to have another party tomorrow. Try again to find the 7 dwarfs. Can you do that? Oh, yeah, I can, said Joggit, delighted to be given another go. With everyone watching, he ran from the ballroom and was on his way. With the colorful banners and flags neatened up, the bright tablecloths changed again, and everything polished and cleaned for a 3rd time, the palace was again ready for the party. Sweet treats weighed down the tables. Snow White was dressed in her 3rd favorite party dress, and the royal orchestra began to play all over again. 3rd time lucky, said Snow White optimistically. With a blast, the trumpets announced the arrival of the special guests, and the large double doors to the ballroom swung open, and everyone gasped with surprise. Again, for there wasn't 7 dwarfs stood upon the other side, but 3 unicorns. Is there any fruit punch? Asked one of the unicorns. Snow White's shoulders sagged. Were you invited by a small boy with a feather in his hat? She asked. Yes, said the 2nd unicorn. Is that all right? Yes, said Snow White reluctantly. Do come in and enjoy yourselves. I just need to have a word with someone. Joggit was once again brought before Snow White, who by some sort of miracle managed to keep any trace of annoyance out of her voice. Instead of the 7 dwarfs, you have somehow managed to invite 3 unicorns, said Snow White. Oops, said the boy quietly. When I entered the woods, I couldn't remember who you said to invite. There seems to be a pattern developing here, said Snow White thoughtfully. We'll just have to have another party tomorrow, but this time I'm going to write the instructions on a piece of paper for you. This she did, writing 7 dwarfs neatly across it in large, bold writing, before handing it over to the small boy. Oh, you can rely on me, said Joggit, clutching the note. With everyone watching, he ran from the ballroom and was on his way. The colorful banners and flags, the bright tablecloths, and everything that needed polishing and cleaned was dealt with all over again the next day, leaving the palace ready for another party. Even more sweet treats were carried to the tables. Snow White was back in her freshly cleaned favorite party dress, and the royal orchestra began to play for the 4th day running. This time, it can't possibly go wrong, said Snow White, remembering her note. The trumpets blasted, the large double doors opened, and everyone gasped with surprise. Again, for there weren't 7 dwarfs stood upon the other side, but 4 pixies. Will there be games? Asked one of the pixies. Snow White's mouth hung open. But I wrote a note, she said with disbelief. Don't know anything about a note, said the 2nd pixie. We were just told to be here by a boy with a feather in his hat. Right, said Snow White, pushing up her sleeves. Come in. I'll be back in a minute. This time, Snow White went to find Joggit herself.
Oh, I'm sorry,
said the boy when she found him.
I lost the note before I got to the woods and I couldn't remember who you said to invite.
Snow White took a deep breath. Right, she said. We'll just have to have another party tomorrow, and this time I'm going to pin the note to the front of your jacket. With this done, she sent Joggit on his way. I'll get it right this time, he shouted. The following day, the banners, flags, and tablecloths were sorted, and everything polished and cleaned for a 5th time. Yet more sweet treats were placed on the table. Snow White was back in her second favorite party dress, and the royal orchestra was beginning to look a little tired. "At last," said Snow White, "everything's taken care of." The trumpets blasted, the large double doors opened, and everyone groaned with disappointment, for there weren't 7 dwarfs stood upon the other side, but 5 goblins.
"I need to use the bathroom,"
said one of the goblins, hopping about. Snow White couldn't believe her eyes. "God, show them where the royal toilets are. I've got to get to the bottom of this." Snow White swiftly found Joggett and told him about the 5 goblins. "Did you lose the note again?" she asked.
No, he insisted. I've still got it. It's just that I can't read.
Snow White took a moment to compose herself. "We'll try again," she said slowly. This time, she drew a picture of the 7 dwarfs and pinned this to the front of Joggett's jacket. "There's no way I can get this wrong this time," he said confidently. But when the ballroom doors swung open at the beginning of the following day's party, he clearly had, for there weren't 7 dwarfs stood upon the other side, but 6 gnomes.
"Ooh, thanks for inviting us,"
said the first gnome.
"We brought you a present,"
said a second. "Oh boy," said Snow White, back in her 3rd favorite party dress. Joggett was summoned, looking very guilty indeed.
"Oh, I'm really sorry,"
he said, when told he'd got it wrong again.
"But the gnomes do look a bit like what you drew in the picture. Oh, can I try just one last time?"
"All right," said Snow White, just a tiny hint of frustration in her voice. "But this time, I'm coming with you." Which meant that on the 7th day, with Snow White back in her favorite dress, the trumpets blared and the doors opened to reveal the 7 dwarfs. And while they tucked into the sweet treats, the trumpets announced further special guests too. The 6 gnomes, the 5 goblins, the 4 pixies, the 3 unicorns, the 2 trolls, and the dragon had been invited too, as well as Joggett, because Snow White was kind and patient and liked to look for the positive in every situation. She understood that it wasn't really Joggett's fault. For someone so young, he had done his best, and thanks to him, the palace had enjoyed a week's worth of parties, with lots of great music and mountains of sweet treats. And now it was time to do it all over again. The end.
So that you don't miss a single episode, just click that subscribe button.